Thanks for taking this time for a quick lunch and learn. I have been over time putting together kind of a list of online databases that are available in the state of Alaska, and federal ones as well, and local ones. When I have a question of trying to fact check something or get some more information, look up who owns a property, for example, or try to get something from a public safety figure. I find a lot of times we'll get official information from a state source, or a press release will come out and it will lead to more questions and answers. So rather than just kind of regurgitating what comes out, we have to do some kind of follow-up to get like an actual real narrative, because after all, we're trying to tell a story. I'm not sure how many of you saw this column. There's a former Alaska Dispatch writer named Craig Madrid. It's kind of a journalism critic. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. But he wrote a column that actually kind of dovetailed into what I'm talking about last week. And it was about a plane crash. It was non-injury, where someone crashed a plane near Nome and then walked away. And Alaska State Troopers put out a press release, and it didn't have very much information. And often it doesn't. You know, they just put out something real preliminary, no information on who owned the aircraft, anything like that. Well, what Craig Madrid's beef was that some Alaska news organizations, probably deadline pressures, what have you, just kind of rewrote the dispatch and didn't look any deeper, even though after asking the troopers released this photo, I'm hoping you can see it, that has the end tail number if you turn your head around. And there are some real simple ways of getting information, like who owns this aircraft, which of course doesn't mean that's the pilot, but you can do a little bit digging, kind of follow to get more to the story. So I read this thing, and I'll let people look at it their own time, but it got me thinking about how this list I have had going might be something that would be good to share to a larger audience. I'm screen sharing. Can you guys see this Google Doc now? Nod your head. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So the link to it is in the chat. It's very informal. Anyone can edit it as they want. But I started with public safety, because I'm sure everyone here knows the Daily Dispatch from Alaska State Troopers. It's don't ever rely on this, because sometimes things, notable incidents will happen in communities, especially rural communities, and don't end up in the dispatch. But sometimes there is stuff in there. Anchorage Police Department, interesting. I actually called them for the first time today. I don't normally deal with them. They don't publish a blotter. It's probably not news for a lot of you here who are working Anchorage. I asked them, if there's something going on, what do you have to do? They said you have to request a case number, and then for a police report, takes a records request. Sounds pretty cumbersome. Fortunately, not all police departments are like that. I know Juneau Police Department does a very bare bones blotter. Again, not everything shows up on it, but those are kinds of things just to start with when you hear about something that's going on. What got me thinking about this was how to look up, for example, when I hear about attorneys and try to get contact information. The Bar Association has every person who's ever been licensed in the state of Alaska has a members directory, for example. So you can look up lawyers, and then that's a good way to, when you want to find out about criminal suspects, or if it's a civil case, things like that. I've included here everything from CourtView, which most people know how to look for court cases. Again, you have to be very careful when you're using CourtView, because anyone who's ever been charged with something is different than being convicted. And we've actually had a lot of stories where the first draft will say that this person was, had been was arrested for attempted murder, 10 years ago, and it turns out actually that's what they were initially charged with. But either they beat the charges, or they pleaded it down to something much lower. And then one other thing I wanted to plug was with federal cases, it gets a little more trickier. There's a really, really good tool that I want people to get to use, which is called Court Listener. And basically what they do is they mirror all the federal dockets. And if you can search there, and then if you want to file, you have to buy it through a pay service called Pacer, which you need to sign up for an account with. But if someone else uses Court Listener and they've paid for it with Pacer and they use this service, it will automatically upload that file. So you can often get the federal docket file for free. And if you're using this plugin, and I use it, for example, every time I pay for a federal court file, it will automatically upload it. So that way, people don't have to pay for the same thing twice. And it's a good thing for journalists to really use. Another really good online database that I found a few years ago is if you want to find if someone's in jail, if they're in custody, you'll get a press release and you'll say, the person was arrested the day before. You can check Violink, and I'm gonna see if I can show you how this works. Let's see. So you're looking for enough. Sorry. An offender in Alaska, you do by name, you put their first name, John Smith, partial name in case, the cops misspelled it or it's hyphenated. I've never gotten a photo, but supposedly, and yes, there's a John P. Smith in the DOC on being incarcerated for the feds. And you can even get information about when they were first booked in, things, and you can even sign up for if you make yourself an account, you can get notification when the person's released. It's set up for crime victims, things like that, but it's really good for journalists to use it as well when you're tracking a case. Here's another link where sometimes the police will be very slow putting out information or not very responsive. You can see all the criminal charges that have been filed in the last 7 days. And that's a really good way to access it. If you live in Juneau, fortunately, the Juneau Police Department and the fire department they have a joint dispatch that they continue to put online. And you can listen to the audio feeds on your phone or have a tab on your browser. As many of you know, Anchorage Police Department started encrypting its police chatter in 2016. There were some high profile cases. I think there was that serial killer, Israel Keys. He used to listen to the police dispatch radio when he was committing his crimes, give himself a heads up if APD was en route. So yeah, they encrypted their police chatter, and it's really too bad for journalists because you can't listen to the scanner unless you have a handheld. But this is a good thing, and this little map shows where you can listen to some public safety. Some of these green areas are like fire departments, and you can also listen to FAA towers. You can get traffic from towers with aircraft and things like that. Another thing, when you're doing local government reporting, disputes between neighbors and things, you want to figure out who owns properties. And fortunately, it seems like everywhere I've looked in Alaska, the assessor's office will have a page where they have their tax rolls up, and it's searchable. Juneau has a really good parcel viewer and an assessor database. I remember going to a journalism conference a number of years ago, and one of the speakers said, "Oh, when you're just doing fact checking, I just would say, hey, do you own that house?" And they say, "Yeah," and then you put that in your story. And that was kind of a red flag for me, because that doesn't seem like a really good way to do your fact checking. I mean, people can lie about owning property or who owns the property. But in this day and age, you can just search the database. So let's see if John Smith owns any property in Juneau. Jenna Smith, you can get, this is really good when you're trying to figure out who lives where, who owns a piece of property. Sometimes it will be in a trust, and then you have to go back to court view, figure out incorporation papers, things like that. But fortunately, we're really lucky in Alaska that most of this stuff is online. There's the state that I originally came from, where I grew up. You have to actually go to the physical courthouse to find out who owns properties, which is very cumbersome. So yeah, I put together, Juneau, Ketchikan, municipality of Anchorage, and people, if you have your own assessors, feel free to add in your own there. Now, I want to get into the part about businesses and LLCs. Fortunately, Alaska has a pretty good page for this. It's a state website. So for corporations, for example, you just can put in the entity name. So like lots of businesses are called 49 because the 49 states. 49 Assets LLC, 49 Bones Smokehouse, registered the name. Okay, Dave Albert in Sitka, for example. This is so invaluable so many times when you'll trying to be reporting on a business and there'll be a number of shell corporations, for example, and then you can finally find the reports and you can see how it breaks down to see, you know, who actually are the owners. And a lot of times, you know, long-standing businesses, you know, they'll file and refile and they'll change things and it'll go around, but you find, you know, where a company's in good standing, it's an LLC, but you see it's in this case, it's owned by another LLC. So then you got to find that LLC and then go back and there's just this whole shell game. And sometimes it will even be owned by an out-of-state LLC, and that can get a little tricky. But in this case, we found, okay, the real owner is Jeff Fanning. And Jeff Fanning, he's on Douglas Highway in Juneau. So that saves some time when you're trying to figure out to get to the bottom of it. Another really important thing on this page is, let me go back to, and I'm purposely going really fast because you guys have this whole list, but business licenses, okay? Every kind of sector, you know, from chiropractors to, you know, to plumbers, pilots, anyone who needs any kind of license, a miner, you can find their business license and if they're in good standing or not. This is especially helpful if you've got someone who's coming up on charges, or they even they work in education, or they work in childcare, a massage therapist, for example, anyone like that. You can see if it's in good standing, and then you can make inquiries directly to the Commerce Department to find out if there's an investigation, like a, you know, an administrative investigation against them. So business licenses are really important to check when you're looking back in people's backgrounds. I'm seeing what Courtney wrote. Court view. Someone changes, charges down there. It no longer shows up in court view. Oh, that's interesting. I did not know that. So yeah,
I found that out while looking up some past cases recently, and I was like, oh, I guess they were thrown out.
but it doesn't say that it's been changed. There's no.
No, there's like no record of it at all.
And that was a law change or a regulation change, or?
I seem to remember a few years ago, the legislature made a rule, and it had to do, I think it partially had to do with when marijuana was legalized, because I think they're talking about wiping those, but it was basically if the charges were completely thrown out or you were completely acquitted, it wouldn't be searchable, like to negatively hamper you in the future.
Okay, that's a really complicated conversation to have about that.
Yeah, and especially like finding out what happened back then, if you know what led to something being acquitted.
Yeah,
what were the charges, what was the record of the case?
Yeah, I can see good arguments on both sides, you know, but I can also see you could really insulate the powerful. No, thank you for that, Courtney. For those of us who live in coastal Alaska, when you're looking for a fishing vessel that sank or something like that, the state of Alaska has a great database for the Commercial Fisheries Entry Commission, and you can look up, you can search by the name. You can also find out by, you know, what kind of permits they have for fishing. I'm not going to get into it right here because it gets very arcane, but just if you hear about it, just having the name of the vessel, you can find a lot of information. You can usually even figure out who the skipper is. For larger ships that are registered, that are documented, and that's for the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard has a site for vessel search, you know, and you can put in, you know, the name of the ship. And what's really cool is this also, it has, you know, ships that are no longer in service, but you can see, you know, that there are ships actually like called the Titanic, and recreational. So here's the, you can look up here, and unfortunately it won't tell you who owns the ship, but I find it really useful sometimes when as long as you're sure you've got the right vessel, you can get some good descriptive stuff, like the length of the ship, the tonnage, things like that, how old it is. So when you get a Coast Guard press release or something like that, you can kind of fill out with some more illustrative details, especially when like two ships crash into each other. It's kind of nice to know which is the larger ship and which is the smaller ship. And they don't usually give you that kind of information. So yeah, that's when you have to like dig through the registry and find stuff like that. Going back to what Craig Medred was beefing about, the FAA has a good website, and you can get all kinds of information from just the serial number. If you found a plane engine in the woods, you get the serial number, but usually it's the N number. And if it's registered in the United States, you put in that, you put in the N number. And there you go. And then you get all kinds of information, Cessna 172, whole thing, figure out who owns it, even have contact information sometimes. And you can figure that out. Getting into environmental things. If there is any kind of spill, anything like that, it goes to DEC's spill response. And they have a good page with good contact information. I find them really professional and really responsive. A note of caution that sometimes, it's because they're very busy and there's lots of resource things going on all the time. They're getting lots of reports. They're not often very good at updating their website when something happens. So if you sit around and wait for what's called a SITREP, a situation report, you could be waiting for days. Interesting. Last one, they haven't updated this since it's like November 18th. But you can request that, and if they know you're interested, they will send you updates, and they can talk to you about that. So these are the good people to get into touch with right away. That's spill response. While we're on the, I think many of you know about the white pages for the state of Alaska. It's also a godsend because if you're trying to figure out who to, if you know the name of the official and the PIO is just sending you a voicemail, you just put in the person's name, and not always, like in this case, it's not, but a lot of times they'll have their direct line. It almost always has the direct email, and people in the state. That's a great way to get them. I also like to, if I'm not getting my information from the PIO, CC the person whose job is to answer that PIO's email. So, kind of cutting out the middle person a little bit right there. The other good thing about this, not a lot of people, well, not everyone knows about, is everyone who works in state government has what's called a PCR number. So for example, you get every Jeff in there. Okay, it's this over here, and I go through on the link, but I show you how you can find the salaries of every state employee, pretty much. It requires going to OMB. Nat Hertz showed me this trick. You go to OMB, you find their budget, go to the agency, you find their full budget book, and then you search by their PCN number, which is formatted this way. And so, for example, we can find that David Steeran, for example, he makes about $142,000 plus $67,000 in benefits. Our friend Jeff Turner in the governor's office, here's his PCN numbers, here's his salary. So it's not always germane for a story, but if we're doing a story about budget and political appointees, things like that, and want to know how much they make, it's a really good way to find budgets. Or if you're just really bored, you want to know how much more the PIO who's not returning your calls makes than you do, you can also use this tool. That also dovetails into the lobbying directory, which is also very handy when you're covering anything about state politics, with the intersection of industry. You put that in here, and you can get the lobbyist name. I made an interesting discovery the other day. What's the name of the? What's the name of that? I'm trying to remember. Right. So as of a couple of years ago, APOC, which is the Alaska Public Offices Commission, has allowed lobbyists to register under an LLC. So legislative consultants is now an LLC. It used to be they always had to put their name in here. So one of the biggest lobbyists in the state of Alaska, legislative consultants, and these are their clients from Big Seafood and Anchorage School District, cruise industry. It says how much their retainer fee is for the year. You know, for example, Alaska Realtors, for example, $50,000 a year. They put under LLC. And the way to get around that is because pretend like they're the employer. You put that in there, and then there's the actual name of the lobbyist. And so you can see Heather Breaks, $600,000, Wendy Chamberlain, $600,000. That's how much they're getting in lobbyist fees for year 2022. And you can go back in time. You can see in 2021. So there's a big jump in their accounts, $400,000 to $600,000. Now, I don't find that particularly interesting, except when it deals with public entities. So for example, you put in borough under employer name, for example, you get to see how much all the boroughs are paying private lobbyists to lobby their interests in the Juneau State House, for example. And that can get kind of interesting when you see the intersection of, you know, using these private lobbyists as a middleman between local government and state government. I'm going off on a complete tangent, but this is a really great tool when you're trying to follow money in politics and see who the point people are. Further down, this is a really great way to find contact information for people who are running for public office. In order to run for public office in Alaska, you have to file what's called a letter of intent with APOC. And I found just in my experience that a lot of times people put their cell phone numbers in their email addresses in there. So like, for example, someone named Pierce Blewett. I don't know who that is. They don't cover. Okay, running for school board. There we go. I'm pretty sure that's a cell phone number. I could be mistaken. 727. And there's an email address. Now, you know, this is really great. I think, you know, not to stock public candidates, but you know, you want to reach out for them. You're putting together candidates for them. You know, you have more than just their Facebook page or something like that. You can just call them right up, send them an email, and reach out to them. And then later down the line, you need contacts for, you know, people in your city council, that sort of thing. Their letter of intent form is often a really, really great place to get their contact information. And you can really go down a rabbit hole with the APOC site. You can find all the transactions, for example, and that's where you can find out how much money people have been getting in their donations for their fundraising. If you want to find someone's a member of a political party, you can use this. I'll show you a little trick here. This tool is actually set up to check to make sure you're registered to vote, but journalists can kind of use it as a tool to see what people's party registration is. So let's see, how about Jacob Resnick? What party is he a member of? You have to know where they get their mail, or I get my mail in Douglas, which is outside of Juneau. That through. Nonpartisan, there you go. As a journalist, there's no reason to vote to register as anything but nonpartisan because there are no closed primaries. But it's kind of interesting sometimes to see what people's political affiliation is. And sometimes you can get, you know, figure out where they live if you want to send them a postcard or something like that, or check out, you know, who owns their property. You can opt out of this database if you want. So not everyone is in it. But sometimes when you're trying to figure out the partisan affiliation of people appointed to boards that are nominally nonpartisan, this tool can be really useful. And then I put this in for those of us who work in radio, how to get a good weather forecast. This is mostly for hosts and things like that, but it's a good tool for figuring out what's to come. So I recommend people just kind of like play around with some of this stuff if they've got questions. Just know that there is so much information out there that you can really, you know, whether you're doing public safety reporting, whether you're doing political reporting, you're covering a zoning change, you want to know how something is zoned or who owns it. There's so much available here. And with that, I just want to see if anyone has any questions or any experiences that they want to share.
Thank Jacob, that's really helpful. You know, I've been doing this for more than a decade, and there's links on here that I either haven't seen or stumbled across once and wasn't able to find them again, or, you know, that kind of thing. So very helpful. And I can't remember. I also occasionally go back into like the, if you want to find out the N number of a plane that crashed, the FAA has a database too. And they have, if you're making this like a publicly editable thing, I'll see if I can dig up that FAA database.
Oh, the NTSB, I think you mean NTSB?
Well, so like if you're in the in between, not in the immediate aftermath of a crash, but like before the preliminary report comes out, often the FAA will have it listed as an incident report. And
Okay.
so it will literally just have like location, date, time, type of aircraft involved, and usually like sometimes an N number. And just sort of as a stand-in for some sort of incident. And I've been able to find that or find out who owned a plane that way before too.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just so much information, but yeah, this is cool because there's, like I said, so many places to get information that you don't always use. So
yeah, NTSB, I put the link to the NTSB site. It's kind of tricky to figure out sometimes. I think they might have changed this around a little bit, but I thought I had the link to how to find, oh yeah, here we go.
well, they have like a crash report by month, and I haven't used this page before.
Yeah, it's tough.
They're always changing things too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm sure, you know, in a few months, some of these links will go dead or things will change and things like that. So it's just it's more about knowing what information you can access and having a reasonable expectation than to have just like a hard-coded link. So that's why. You know, another thing I didn't talk about is the state checkbook. I think it's in here somewhere, but you can see how, you know, who the state of Alaska has paid over the last 6 months, and you can find some very interesting things there. And I also want to remind people who haven't already to please renew your memberships to Alaska Press Club. Helps fund our conference and things that we'll be doing. Yeah, Rosie just put up the membership link. And it's not very much money, but it does keep us going forward. I know everyone's busy, so I'm not going to take any more time than I have to, but I wanted to know if anyone has any questions. If not, you can hit me up offline if you want. But I just hope that some of this is kind of could be useful. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jacob.